Want to know how to grow your cyber career? Well, reading books and watching videos is not enough. You need access to a lab where you can practice what you learned. In this episode, I share how I built a home lab using a mini PC and free software. If you're looking to build a lab and don't want to spend a lot of money, keep listening.
Do you want a career in cybersecurity? Are you unsure how to start? Curious what it means to be a cybersecurity professional? This is the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast with Dr. Jeff Colburn. He's a 30-year industry professional and the founder of Team Caveo, a company that specializes in helping people launch cyber careers. Join us on this podcast as we explore what it means to be a cybersecurity professional and how to get started. Welcome to the show.
Not sure if a cyber career is for you? Are you looking to get started? Are you looking to grow your career? Are you feeling stuck and don't know where to begin? My Get Good Fast coaching will help you quickly grow as a cyber professional. I can help you become a great engineer in months rather than years. It doesn't matter if you're new to the industry or mid-career. I coach you through that same process that has worked for me and my students. Go to coaching.cyberjobhacks.com to schedule your session today, or just follow the link in the show notes. Welcome to the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff Colburn. Today I want to talk about having access to a lab. And for those entering IT, a lab is an environment where you can practice on equipment. And having access to a lab is essential to developing your skills. You need that hands-on experience to reinforce your knowledge. So back when I started, having a lab meant purchasing a lot of equipment off eBay and having a rack in your office. Today, you have many options. There's cloud-hosted lab resources. You can build a home lab without purchasing all that network equipment. It could be as simple as having a small server or a mini PC. So in this episode, I'm going to share how I just recently built my home lab on an Intel NUC. So, before I get into, how I built my lab, what I use to build my lab, I'm going to talk a little bit about why I'm building a lab, right? When you're building a lab, you really, there's a goal behind it. There's a purpose behind it. So what I'm looking to do is I want to start practicing on Arista switches. So, I've many years on Cisco switches. I have experience with Juniper switches, but a very little hands-on experience with Arista. So my goal for this home lab was, I want to get proficient on Arista switches. And so I was just going to create a small environment, just a handful of switches, and then I can start off by getting familiar with the command line. Then later, I'll add Ansible so I can start practicing automation and, using, both Python scripts and Ansible playbooks. So that's the goal. This is why I'm building this home lab. I just don't build a lab because, what you put in the lab is relevant. So if you don't have a goal, then you don't really know what you need in your lab and you could be wasting resources. So, I have a very specific goal in mind when I built my lab. So what did I use? Well, it's funny. It's definitely a lot different from when I built my CCIE lab over 20 years ago. Back then, I had a full-height 19-inch rack in my office. I had about 8 Cisco 2900 series routers. I had a couple of 3550 switches, and I bought all this off eBay, right? And the room got really loud. Once I turned all that equipment on, it just the room was filled with fan noise. Well, this weekend when I built my home lab, like there was no 19-inch rack, right? That none of this hardware. I didn't have to go order it, wait for it to arrive, right? I built my home lab on an Intel NUC. Now, this thing, if you're not familiar with an Intel NUC, it's a mini PC, and it's about 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches by 2 inches. It's like looks like a hockey puck sitting on my desk, and it has an i7 processor, about 64 gig of RAM, and about 500 gig of storage. Right, it's definitely a lot less equipment than I had in the past. So it's not taking up all that space. It's not requiring all that power. And it definitely cost me significantly less than when I built my lab years and years ago. My first lab I built years and years ago. So that's the hardware. So my hardware is this Intel NUC, right? I have this little tiny thing sitting on my desk. So what's the software that I'm going to use? Well, the great thing now is network vendors offer virtual versions of their appliances, right? So switches and routers, you don't have to buy physical switches and routers anymore, right? So, with cloud adoption, it really drove this need for virtual appliances. And so now you can load you can install these virtual appliances on virtual machines, either on-prem or in the cloud. But now, even more recently, vendors started developing containerized versions of their appliances. So by using containers, now you don't need the hypervisor like ESXi, KVM. Don't have to build up virtual machines, right? So that's the road I decided to go. I didn't want to have to build. I didn't want to use KVM. I didn't want to have to build virtual machines and and load my appliances on that. I could just use the containers. So the nice thing as well is Arista offers free versions of their virtual and containerized software, right? You just download it from their site, and all it costs you is time to create the guest account. So I had access. So like I said, I'm building an environment so I can learn the Arista switches. So I need the Arista software, right? So CEOS is their containerized appliance, right? So, but for my host operating system, I went with CentOS 9 streaming, right? So that's a distribution of Linux, and that's also free to download, right? So, again, only thing I've purchased so far is my Intel NUC. So far, my software is free. So, like I said, because I went with containerized appliances, I don't need to worry about installing a hypervisor or spinning up any virtual machines. And also, I don't need to install EVE-NG, where EVE-NG is a popular lab environment people use to virtualize their labs. But because I went with containerized appliances, I use Container Lab, and I'm going to use that to create my virtual lab topology. And what Container Lab does, it'll launch your containerized appliances and provide the connectivity between these appliances. And all this is defined in a very simple YAML file, right? This YAML file is going to identify the containerized appliances you want to use for that particular lab and how these appliances are to be connected. So it's relatively simple. So like I said, so the software I needed, just to kind of recap the software, was CentOS 9 streaming, CEOS for my Arista switches, and then Container Lab, right? So again, all this software is free, downloadable off their websites. So again, only thing cost me so far is that Intel NUC. So what was the process I followed? Well, I'm not a software developer by any means, right? I'm a route switch engineer, and I have a little Linux experience, right? Just over my years of dealing with Linux, I'm certainly not a Linux expert, but I can find my way around Linux. But the point I'm trying to make is you don't have to be an expert to build this, right? You don't have to be some sort of software developer. It's not hard. It's relatively simple process, right? So like to install the CentOS on my NUC, I just create a bootable USB on my Mac, right? You can do this on Windows and Linux as well. But once I downloaded that CentOS software from their site, I used my Mac. I created a bootable USB, and that was what I was going to use to get the CentOS on my Nook, right? So I powered my Nook with that bootable USB, and then it was a very simple install process. Just walked you through. I wasn't doing anything crazy. I just went with the standard install. And the only issue I encountered is my wireless adapter wasn't available. And that's what I used for my network connectivity in my office. So I had to get that working. So, I used a Linux command called rfkill, and identified my adapter was being blocked by hardware. So had to be that my adapter was disabled in BIOS. So that was an easy fix. I just went into BIOS, enabled my wireless adapter, and it came right up, right? So now my Nook has Linux running and it has network connectivity. So once I had that, I was able to download and install Container Lab, right on the Nook. And so now my Mac is out of the picture. I'm just doing everything on the Nook now, right? So for my Linux prompt, I download, install Container Lab. Now they have different ways you can do it manually. I went with a quick setup, pretty much downloads everything I needed, including Docker. So I was able to download that and install it with one string of commands. Basically one command with a bunch of extensions. So I didn't have to use the USB anymore, right? So for the Arista CEOS, like I mentioned, I downloaded it right from this site directly to my Nook. Once it was downloaded, I imported it into Docker. So Docker was installed as part of the Container Lab install. And now I had to create my Container Lab, right? So I had to create that YAML file so I could actually use my Arista switches. So again, I went back to the quick start example. They have examples of different Container Labs. And so I found one, a very simple one, and I just modified it to fit my desired environment. So once I had that YAML file, I was able to deploy my Container Lab. And, basically one command to deploy the Container Lab. It fires up your containerized appliances, connects them together, and then once it's done deploying, it displays the management IP addresses for my switches. So I was able to launch, new terminal windows for each switch, and SSH into each switch. Then I was able to see that my switches actually were connected, based upon how I defined it in that YAML file. So within minutes, I jumped in, I configured the interfaces, I got OSPF and BGP running between two switches because, this is my first time using Container Lab. So this was just really a quick test to see how it worked and if it worked. And it worked great because in the past, I had built, hypervisors, I had loaded Eve, NG, and just a lot of time, a lot of things that, a lot of things I had to resolve, issues I ran into. Honestly, this was the easiest lab I stood up of my past experiences. This, as far as complexity, real simple. As far as time, it really took no time at all compared to what I've done in the past. So just kind of wrapping things up. As I mentioned, it's essential to have access to a lab to develop your hands-on experience, right? It's not enough just to read about the technology. It's not enough just to watch videos. This is the reason my students have 2 hours of labs for every hour of lecture, right? It's that hands-on experience that reinforces what you learned, right? And more importantly, it allows you to see it in action, right? It's great to hear about it, to read about it, but you want to see it. You want to see how it works, and that's what a lab allows you to do, right? So even with my years of experience, I still lab. Whenever I'm trying to learn something new, I have to lab it. I can read about it, and that's great. It's important to read about it because you want to understand how that technology works, but you also need to see the technology in action. You need to be able to configure it and see how it works. So I still do it. And if you're going to grow as an engineer, you're going to have to learn how to lab. You're going to have to get access to a lab. Either you're going to be using some cloud-hosted lab through somebody else, or you just build a home lab like I just did this weekend. Actually, what I did on Saturday. It didn't take me 2 days. It just took me, a little bit of time on Saturday. So that's, and, to be honest, labbing, that's the fun part, right? You can study, but it's when you get in the lab and you're working with equipment, it's fun. And if you don't enjoy working on equipment, you might want to rethink why you're getting into IT or why you're getting into cyber, because that's what it's about, right? It's about working on that equipment. So, that's the fun part. Like when I was preparing for my CCIE, I spent 7 months every weekday evening, every weekend building labs. I couldn't tell you the hours I spent on labs, but what I can tell you is made me a much better engineer. Passing an exam didn't make me a CCIE. It was the hours in the lab, right? Passing that exam only validated what I had learned. So if you want to grow your cyber career, you need a lab. As you see from my lab, it costs very little. The only thing I purchased was the Intel NUC. All the software was free. The operating system, Container Lab, the Arista CEOS, all free, all downloadable. I didn't have to purchase and wait for things to be delivered. It's just right there, right? Just free and easily accessible. So if you want to, know the specific process I followed, like, the sites I went to, the commands I executed, I'll be posting this, this whole process. I'm going to write it up and I'll be posting it in our Facebook group. So if you are part of that Facebook group, great. You'll probably see it in the next few days. If you haven't joined, go to cyberjobhacks.com. Real easy to join our group. I'm releasing information from time to time. So if you want to know how I built this lab on, Intel NUC or even something similar, it doesn't have to be Intel NUC. You can, pretty much any small platform will work. But it's more about the software than the hardware to get this working. And like I said, it was all free. And it allows me now, I have Arista switches. My goal is achieved, right? I got Arista switches running. I'm in there configuring them. And then probably the next thing I'll be doing is be loading Ansible. So now I can start practicing automation. But yeah, I set out, this was my goal for the lab, and I spent a Saturday building it, and now I'm able to practice what I set out to practice. So I hope you found this helpful. Until next time, have a great week. Do you want to be part of an online community of like-minded people? Join us at cyberjobhacks.com, where you'll receive the latest industry news, cybersecurity career trends, invitation to free events, and exclusive offers. So join our private Facebook group at cyberjobhacks.com.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please share with a friend who may be interested in becoming a cyber professional. Also, please leave a review on Apple Podcast. Your feedback is greatly appreciated, as it will shape our future episodes. Meet us here every Monday as we discuss the cyber job market and how to launch your career. Until next time, have a great week.